Well, former Foreign Minister Bob Carr, I used to work for him when he was the New South Wales opposition leader, has called for the economy to become less dependent on population growth and instead focus on productivity. The publication of the federal government's population projects, the national population would be 1 million people shy of where it should have been in 2031 had the coronavirus pandemic not hit. Joining me to discuss our current approach is Michael Bayliss from the Sustainable Population Australia. And I might add that Bob Carr is the patron of that body. Michael, what is the core argument you're making about the difference between our projected population, say, out of the Treasury data, and the way we're tracking now? What is your version of a sustainable Australia, and do you have a number in mind on an ideal population?
We don't have a number in mind of a total population. I think the rate of population growth needs to slow down, and we need to have a broadly stable population long term, whatever that is. Our future does not lie in perpetual unsustainable population growth. And as our patron Bob Carr has said, we need to have controls on the nation's population growth for the sake of our natural environment and quality of life.
I'm just wondering though, Bob, and I've got great regard for him, but he was saying Sydney was full back in 2000 when it had a population, I think, of around 4 million. It's currently got 5 million, and I'm just not seeing that it doesn't strike me that we're at capacity. I'm just a little concerned about this argument because if you look at a couple of other factors. I happen to have a geostrategic bias. I'm a big Australia person by dint of the fact that I think we're sparsely populated in a region of populous emerging powers. That's the first point. Secondly, if you look at the numbers that Peter Costello, who's the protagonist in this debate, has put out there, in 1975, for every Australian aged 65, there were 7 working Australians. And in 2047, that's projected to be 2.7 working Australians for every 65-year-old. Now, I'm not seeing any evidence that employers are looking at older workers to keep them employed. Aren't we at some risk of actually growing old and saddling a shrinking millennial and young people workforce with an eye-watering matter of debt? I've given you a lot to munch on there, so feel free to take all that argument apart.
Wow, where do we start? Well, first of all, I'd just like to say that Sustainable Population Australia has released a discussion paper. It's called Silver Tsunami or Silver Lining, Why We Should Not Fear an Ageing Population. I highly recommend giving that a read. I guess the central argument of that is we've got an ageing population because people are living longer. It's a miracle of our medical system and the health of Australians, and that's something that should be celebrated and not demonised. I think older Australians are getting quite sick of being blamed for an apparent ageing population crisis. Now, look, I'm not saying that, after people retire and in the latter stages of life, that doesn't cost the economy. Conversely, if you're trying to address it by a high fertility rate, well, and increasing the number of children, well, children cost on average about $200,000 in a lifetime. For each additional person we add to Australia, we need at least $100,000 of additional infrastructure and public expenditure. Now, before COVID, when we were increasing at the rate of the size of a new Canberra every year, 360,000 to 400,000 people, that amounts to about $40 billion of infrastructure per year. So, I fail to see why an ageing population is so much worse than a rapidly growing population. What I've read in the research, that a rapidly growing population of more than, say, 1% per annum of population growth is actually more costly to the economy.
But I don't see, conversely, the argument against having bigger families spending money on infrastructure. Look at, you know, when you talk about sustainability, look at vertical gardening, the work that the late Mike Jeffrey had done on extracting more out of what we thought was unusable agricultural soil and so on. There's a lot to the sustainability picture that I think goes beyond the population argument, surely.
Well, population is one significant factor. It isn't the only factor, but it is a significant factor. You talk about vertical gardens, but so far they're the exception, not the rule. I mean, most of the new developments in the major cities, such as Sydney and Melbourne, are largely prefab high-rise development, which has got very poor shelf life, and indeed in many cases very poorly designed. They're designed to invest in, they're not designed to live in. So, you know, having a few examples in our cities of green development and vertical gardening doesn't equalise to the amount of land that we need to clear for suburban sprawl, or the amount of rare sands that we need to build new high-rises and infrastructure.
I was actually referring to the Middle East.
The sand is actually running out. Sorry?
I was actually referring to the Middle East, where it's become very normal. Final question. Do you endorse the use of nuclear power as part of sustainability?
We don't really have a say on nuclear power. That's not within the organisation's remit to have an opinion on that.
No, I thought you were about capping emissions potentially. That was the nexus I was drawing. So if that's not part of your remit, that's fine. I understood.
Yeah. But in terms of capping emissions, we definitely agree that, emissions per capita need to be capped as soon as possible. We need to meet our climate commitments, and it's very hard to do if our population's expected to double by 2040. That means we all have to be consuming half as much as we are already just to be breaking even.